causality, move towards causality. And if we can model that inferential analysis using some kind of statistical model, uh, typically that would be good in explaining the variability of the dependent variable, which is basically a proxy for the outcome. The outcome or the phenomena, the dependent variable is basically a proxy for that phenomena. So if we can explain the variability of that phenomena by looking at the factors which lead to that variability, we need to validate a model using some kind of an econometric modeling, which may have elements of dimension reduction, elements of regression analysis, or elements like, even if you're not able to move towards explaining it or inferential analysis, we can also go with, classification or prediction method. But here also the prediction method should explain why certain phenomenon is happening. So what happens typically? We start off with data acquisition, move towards data conversion, and then comes the big data analytics block. So the big data analytics block, we may use machine learning for text mining. We may use ML for network mining. We may use ML for image mining or video mining. And after we run this ML methods, the idea is we identify factors which will be closer to theoretical building blocks. We identify the factors through which we are able to identify potential constructs or theory. The theoretical lens, after we identify that, we try to build a model, and this model is something that we are inductively building. After we build this model inductively, we need to think of mechanisms where we have measures for the constructs which are forming the model. We have operational measures, and typically if it is text mining based data, we'll go with a bag of words, we'll go with specific types of keywords which are representing that factor or construct. And after we do that, then we go to the validation of the model using some statistical measure, and then go back to ground back a theory, to ground back our findings back to the theory, saying that, okay, this is what we knew about the phenomenon earlier, and this is what we did not know about the phenomenon earlier. And now, because our model is coming in from the data, we explain something new about the relationships which was not earlier observable. If we can identify new constructs through the process, that is exciting. And we may say that this new construct is typically described in this particular manner, and it has not been found in existing literature. Then that is an exciting contribution. Alternatively, we can say that, okay, these constructs have not been studied together because probably they were coming in from very different related disciplines. Maybe they were coming in from very different disciplines. So when we are connecting them together, we are building bridges. We are building bridges to connect knowledge, or we call that as nomological networks. We are basically connecting those networks together so that they are able to kind of build and strengthen the networks which are earlier isolated. So just to build up the big data model block, it consists of methods like deep learning, ML methods which can do classification, then methods like support vector machine, Bayesian networks, unsupervised learning, and all these different methods. If we were to structure that for social media, again, this is one of a paper in decision analysis, which is published from Informs. Uh, Social media building blocks itself can have huge number of methods, like we talked about descriptive analytics, content analytics, network analytics, space-time analytics. And now, in fact, this paper has the highest cited paper of 2017 for this Journal of Decision Analytics, which is also a very reputed journal. And we just got to know that few days back when the editor wrote to us that this is one of the highest cited paper in that 2017 edition of the journal. So if we look at uh, interpretation, most of the times these ML models would try to demonstrate either one of these. It will either say that there are clustering among data points which is visible, or association among data points which is visible, or it will result in a classification model through which you are predicting that the dependent variable will behave in a particular way or not behave in a particular way. So it's a categorical dependent variable. But the idea is we need to move beyond that and say that we are moving towards a causal or inferential model in which we say that these factors that we have identified, can we look at how these factors explain the dependent variable in any particular way. So the inferential analysis basically requires a lot more deep diving into, and this is what is typically missing in many of the submissions. So we just reject many of the submissions purely because there is no inferential analysis or causality research in any of these studies. So if there is no causality research in any of the studies, you're not explaining anything about the phenomenon. You're not explaining anything about social sciences. You're just collecting the data, running few algorithms on top of it, and saying that with this algorithm, this data is better described. So what? If the data is better described, that is not a theoretical contribution. The theoretical contribution comes when you're able to explain something about the phenomenon. If you're collecting data about Indian voting behavior, then are you saying something in generalizable which explains voting behavior in general? If you're collecting data on, say, uh, purchase behavior on e-commerce site, are you explaining something which explains purchase behavior on e-commerce portal? You have to explain something about the phenomena which is typically missing in most of these researches. And for that, you can have a mixed research methods. Another big challenge is, unlike a typical, theory building article, most of the times, a typical theory building article will have a title page followed by abstract, keywords, and then you start off with the introduction, literature review, then move on to theory development where you establish your hypothesis, then talk of the research methodology design, and then the results, and then move on to your discussion, conclusion, and references. But in a big data driven research, because it's an inductive theory research, what happens is after the literature review, a lot of times it becomes very difficult because it's not really deductive. So you cannot jump to theory development immediately. Most of the times you would start off with a research design, and then after you do an exploratory study, you would come to your theory development section. And after you build your theory development section, then you come to your confirmatory model or the confirmatory results. So you have your research design followed by the research design, typically the theory development section, which is coming as an outcome of the exploratory research which you do. And then comes the confirmatory results in the results part. And then you move to your discussion. So the article structuring has to be very well thought of because article structuring is not so straightforward as it is in a typical, deductive research methodology where you're collecting data from, say, survey, when you're collecting data from, say, experiments and validating a model. That is slightly different as compared to this. Here, article structuring depends on the research design that you take, to what extent the model is built upon existing literature, to what extent the model is built upon completely being inductively generated from the data, and then how the model is validated. So this middle part, the red part, is something which gets a little tricky and needs to be really thought out of. And in fact, we have struggled quite a lot in many of our papers where we had to rethink the entire structure, rethink the entire manuscript purely based on how the article structure has been developed. And of course, there are many challenges in the journey. Uh, how do you collect the data? It cannot be based on convenience. It cannot be based on what data is available to us. It has to be based on sampling strategy, how you are choosing keywords, how you're choosing entities, what is the unit of analysis, who are you studying, what is the context of the phenomenon that you're studying, Which is the unit of analysis? Is it an individual? Is it the organization? Is it the technology or the platform itself? So all these things become very important question. How do you handle the outliers in the data? How do you establish the reliability and validity of the measures that you're generating from the data? So all these things require a lot more deep dive into the study. And this is basically uh, something that was brought out in British Journal of Management, which talks about that all studies, all methods will have typically some restriction. For example, if you're doing something like a cross-sectional study, like you create a instrument which is a survey instrument, and then you do a a cross-sectional study in which the survey instrument is basically administered to a large population, say 300 respondents, and you try to mine that data using something like structured equation modeling. Uh, that has got very high generalizability. If the sampling is good, the sampling methodologies are robust enough, but that might not have that much of causality established. You may not be able to explain causality. And there might be also restrictions of internal reliability. Similarly, on the other hand, if you have an experiment, a field experiment, which is controlled for, a lab experiment, which is controlled for, there may be very high internal consistency in such a lab experiment, but it will have challenges of, how you are able to generalize the findings, to what extent you are able to generalize the findings. Now, what happens is whenever you're trying to talk about any big data driven research, we have to be very, very sure to what extent we are reporting the limitations of the study. What are the areas where we are saying that this is generalizable? And what are the areas where our findings are having limitations of generalizability or internal consistency? And many a times, internal consistency is a big area, a big challenge that we have to address in most of the big data driven research. So with that, I'll be stopping off because it is 10:45. I think I'll have some 15 minutes for question and answer. So these are the basic articles which are building the concepts for this talk. And you're happy to, I'm happy to share any more context, any more discussions surrounding the discussion or surrounding the talk that I've given. And if you have any query, anything, feel free to reach out to me. And the concepts for the talk are in the first half, where we are building the entire argument of what big data driven research should try to address. How should big data driven research be crafted so that they are publishable? Because many a times, whenever you see these researches, you just take 5 minutes to scroll through that and then you take a decision. An editor has to take a decision that they are not really publishable. What makes a big data driven research publishable? You should go through these articles so that you get a detailed understanding what big data driven research should be like. And applications of this methodology, applications of these approaches, if you're looking at it, then you can see many of these approaches are our studies itself. But like for example, Professor H.R. Rao uh, produces a lot more papers surrounding similar kind of methods. And I've shared a couple of his papers in, say, for example, in International Journal of Information Management, or some of his papers like in Information Systems Research, where he has used user-generated content to make some sense and bring out a theoretical archetype typically from user-generated content. And we have also done that in many of our studies, like in Information System Frontiers, Technological Forecasting and Social Changes, then in Industrial Marketing Management. These are A-star journals. So we hope that if you want to venture into theory building with big data driven research, some of these might be exciting for you, because in some of these, we're trying to talk about, how we can measure consumer experiences, which is a marketing concept. Some of these are related to, information system concepts, and some of these are related to, even strategic concepts. So with this, I'll stop off today's session. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, sir, for this wonderful session. If anybody have any questions, please write it in the chat box.
And meanwhile, please fill up the attendance form in the chat box.
I see that the talk is getting recorded. Will it be available on YouTube or any open platform?
Sir, we'll share it with you. We'll send it.
You'll be
We'll send
sharing
it.
it with me.
Right.
Okay, okay. That will be really helpful. So
I'll
if
send
you
it.
upload it in YouTube and you can share that link with me, then that will be really helpful.
We'll do that,
I
sir.
can then share it across different
Right, sir.
networks.
We'll share the link.
Sir, there is one question from Chandan. What should be first platform where I can submit my research on very basic level?
Okay. See, where you can submit your research, there are different, um, journal ranking schemes. Like there is APDC, ABS, CNRS. These are all different journal ranking schemes. Now, depending on the necessity of your institution, you have to choose a journal which is matching that scheme. Of course, if you have to get a good job, then for your job talk, it is very important that you score higher quality journals, because today, if you're looking at entry level, interviews and everything, and because I sit in many selection committees also for faculty recruitment, so in all those selection committees, when we sit, like recent times, I sat for uh, one of the IITs, uh, IIT Dhanbad and IIM Calcutta very recently. And there, the fundamental thing is that how many A stars have you got? They will not look at the count. If you have 5 Cs, they'll not really look at that, but they'll see if you've got one A star or not. So the idea is not just getting a number, but trying to at least score a number that will get counted for your, subsequent career progression. That is one thing. The second thing is sometimes you might just be needing that number. So if you're just needing that number, one of the good ways to look at potential journals is after you have crafted the manuscript, then you look at source. You go to Scopus and look at sources and then bring out that discipline. If you bring out that discipline, you will see that Scopus will be listing out all the related publications which are made in that discipline. So when you are searching in Scopus by sources, it will bring out all the different journals, and it will also give you the number of articles they publish in a particular year. So if you look at some of these journals where, typically you find that it is relatively higher acceptance rates, probably that is easier, but whether that will add value to your CV in terms of getting you a conversion, getting you a job talk, you need to rethink on that. So for initial submission, if it is you're just starting, maybe you have not started your doctoral journey also, and you want to start off your process of at least having the first experience of publication, you can just look at any Web of Science or Scopus Index journal, preferably Web of Science, because Scopus is too broad and quality metrics in Scopus. Uh, a lot of time what happens that it is indexed in Scopus and then Scopus may deregister it also because it does not meet quality indexing, you know. So Scopus is relatively easier to get indexed in. as compared to Web of Science. But, you know, if a journal does not follow all the protocols that Scopus expects it to, then it gets deregistered from Scopus as well. So having a mechanism in which you check whether the journal is indexed in Scopus as well as indexed in Web of Science will basically, kind of reduce this risk, and then subsequently you would be able to kind of build on top of it. You'd be able to build your career on top of it, and then maybe as you progress in your career, maybe when you join your doctoral journey, or even when you complete your doctoral journey and join academia, then probably that's going to work out more in your favor. Maybe that's going to be a more, so keep building from strength to strength. Start off the journey somewhere, but always know that unless you are trying for really high impact journals, selection process in many established institutes become a little challenging. It's purely it's nothing to do with nobody's willing to consider you. It's just a matter of the available talent versus the number of available seats. If there are two vacant places, there are maybe 200 applications for that space. There has to be a concrete objective mechanism in which those two people are selected for those seats. So you have to also make your CV in such a way so that you're able to fill those two seats. Thank you, Professor Saini. Always my pleasure to give a talk.
Thank you, sir, for enlightening us with the wonderful session. I think there are no more questions for today, so we can end this session now.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, Doctor.
So there will be a break for half an hour, and we
Sure.
will rejoin for the next session at 11:30.
Just a kind reminder, please fill up the attendance form which is mentioned in the chat box. You can exit the meeting after filling up the sheet, and you can rejoin in 30 minutes for the second session. Thank you.